George Lucas copped a lot of stick for the Star Wars prequel trilogy from fans and media alike, with some reports suggesting it played a part in his decision to sell Lucasfilm. But what did George himself feel about the trilogy as a whole, and more specifically, the movie that started it all off? Strap yourselves in as we once again venture back to the time of the prequels, May 1999, as George Lucas looks back on the reception the Phantom Menace received.
I know we're in trouble, just hang on!
Thankfully, perceptions of the prequel trilogy as a whole are largely more positive as we sit here almost 2 decades later, but it wasn't always this way. The story of how Anakin came to be Darth Vader is invented way back in the 1980s, as George needed to know where this character come from to better tell the story of Darth Vader during the original trilogy.
You were once Anakin Skywalker, my father.
And if you would like to check out that video, I'll link it at the end of this one. But work on the prequel trilogy beginning with the Phantom Menace actually began on November 1st, 1994. Which was George's first day of writing the story, which went on to be released on May 19th, 1999. Despite its mixed reviews, The Phantom Menace was a financial success. It made over $64 million on its opening weekend, and over $430 million that year in the US alone. It went on to make over $1 billion worldwide. Looking back on the movie with Paul Duncan from the Star Wars Archives book, George goes on to say, Episode 1 became the highest grossing Star Wars movie of all time, but they were all successful. The people who loved 1, 2 and 3 the most were 10 to 12 year olds. They loved Jar Jar. There was a completely different reaction from the critics, who loved Star Wars when they were 10 years old, and wanted to feel the same way about the new films. 20 years later, they never understood that it was a movie for 12-year-olds. Now, before we continue, what George mentions here goes a long way in explaining just why the prequels are better received now than they were during their initial release. Saying the movie, and in fact we can count this for the first 6, were made effectively for 10 to 12-year-olds, that's not to say older or younger people can't enjoy them too, because they certainly do, but it was 10 to 12-year-olds the movie was made for essentially, and of course, as the movies themselves aged, so did the 12-year-olds who grew up with them, which has now resulted in them being more positively received. George continues by saying, the movies pretty much turned out the way that I wanted them to. There are scenes that are in my personality that other people might think, why did you do that? Most of the stupid things are done because I like them. For example, I thought Jar Jar getting his tongue grabbed by Qui-Gon was funny.
Don't do that again.
The 30-year-olds thought it was stupid, but the 10-year-olds thought it was great. Now, I have to say, unfortunately, the actor who portrayed Jar Jar Binks, Ahmed Best, went through an extremely rough time due to his portrayal of Jar Jar Binks. However, his experience within Star Wars has been much more positive of late, with Ahmed now playing Jedi Master Kelleran Beck, who we saw save Grogu from the Jedi Temple during Order 66. George elaborates by saying, Jar Jar became controversial. The media decided that Jar Jar Binks was black and a racial stereotype, which meant they couldn't like him. The critique for the Wall Street Journal wrote that he was a Rastafarian steppin' fetch it. Somebody in the Los Angeles Times said that it was racist. Another complained that he had a Caribbean accent. Well, it's not a Caribbean accent, it's a South Sea Island accent, where people speak in pidgin English. In a lot of cases, you can't immediately understand what they're talking about because, like Cockney rhyming slang, they substitute words, but the viewers have to follow the movie, otherwise we've got to subtitle the whole thing. So I wrote a modified version of that into the script. And this is where Paul Duncan asks the question, before you cast? And George replies, yeah, a lot of people tried out for the part, and I hired the best actor for the job, who just happened to be black. The inspiration for Jar Jar was Goofy. He looks like Goofy and is Goofy. Maybe Goofy was not as famous and as well loved as Mickey Mouse, but he still had followers and nobody condemned him. Wow, okay, so we can actually pick quite a bit from what George has said there. George was, and likely still is, very happy with how the prequels came out, despite some fans and sections of the media taking a dislike to the new look and feel of Star Wars at the time, with George putting that down to them not really understanding that just as the original trilogy was made for kids, so was the prequels. The only difference now is, however, that the kids that went out to watch the original trilogy aren't kids anymore. But what I also find very interesting here is the Disney connections to George Lucas's Star Wars. Just like the prequel trilogy before it, the sequel trilogy also caused division amongst fans. Whether its popularity over time will increase is yet to be seen, but a large chunk of the blame is thrown towards the fact that Disney made the sequels and not George Lucas. And this is why it's fascinating to know that Disney actually played a part in George Lucas's Star Wars way before they took the franchise over, with George revealing that Goofy served as the inspiration for Jar Jar Binks. So my question to you is, do you think the sequel trilogy will see an uptick in popularity as time goes on, just like the prequels did? Leave a like if you enjoyed today's video. Keep an eye out for our next adventure into the making of Star Wars, which will be out very, very soon. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. I'll catch you in the next one. May the Force be with you.